Nobody tells you this. But your 30s are not the decade where money finally clicks into place. They're the decade where money feels louder, heavier, and somehow more confusing than it ever did before. In your 20s, being broke had a strange kind of innocence to it. You expected it. You joked about it. You lived with roommates, ate cheap food, and told yourself things would be different later. But now it is later. You're older, smarter, more responsible. You make more money than you ever have before. And yet, it still feels like you're barely keeping your head above water. That's the part nobody warns you about. You start asking yourself uncomfortable questions late at night. Why does this feel so hard? Why don't I feel more secure by now? How are other people my age buying homes, traveling, and raising families while I'm stressed about next month? And the scariest question of all quietly sneaks in. What if I'm doing something wrong? More hustling, more discipline, more sacrifice, more perfect decisions. But what if the problem isn't that you're bad with money? What if the rules you think you're supposed to follow were never designed for this stage of life in the first place? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Building wealth in your 30s doesn't fail because you don't try hard enough. It fails because your 30s are when life gets complicated faster than your brain can process. This is the decade where everything stacks up at once. Careers get serious. Relationships get serious. Responsibilities multiply quietly in the background. Your money isn't just paying for you anymore. It's paying for stability, for safety, for future promises you haven't even made yet. Instead, you're surrounded by silent comparisons. A friend casually mentions a house. A coworker talks about investments like it's obvious, even if you don't know why. So you assume the problem must be you. You assume wealth is something you should have figured out by now. That if you were smarter, more disciplined, or more motivated, this wouldn't feel so messy. But that belief is exactly what keeps people stuck. Because wealth in your 30s doesn't grow the way you expect it to. It grows quietly, unevenly, with long stretches where nothing seems to be happening at all. And when no one tells you that ahead of time, it's easy to panic. Easy to overcorrect. Easy to make decisions driven by fear instead of clarity. This video isn't about quick wins. It's not about becoming rich fast. And it's definitely not about comparing yourself to anyone else. Why it feels harder than it should. Why effort doesn't always equal visible progress. And why feeling behind is often a sign you're actually right on schedule. If you've ever felt like your money stress doesn't match your income. If you've ever wondered why stability still feels fragile. If you've ever worried that time is slipping away faster than your savings, this is for you. Because the truth about building wealth in your 30s isn't what most people think. And once you see it clearly, the pressure changes, the guilt fades, and the path forward finally starts to make sense. Not the version you show other people, the real one. Your paycheck comes in and for a brief moment, you feel okay. Maybe even relieved. You tell yourself this month will be different. You'll be more intentional. You'll finally make progress. Then the money starts leaving. Rent or a mortgage pulls its share immediately. Something breaks. Something always breaks. A car issue. A phone issue. A medical bill you didn't plan for but can't ignore. Before you know it, that sense of relief is gone. You're not reckless. You're not careless. You're just tired. Tired of tracking every expense. Tired of feeling like one unexpected cost could throw everything off. Tired of doing all the right things and still feeling behind. Your 30s are full of quiet, financial pressure that doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up in subtle ways. You hesitate before opening your banking app. You mentally calculate prices while standing in line. You delay decisions because you're not sure if now is the right time. You don't feel broke exactly, but you don't feel safe either. And that in-between feeling is exhausting. What makes it worse is that your responsibilities don't feel optional anymore. In your 20s, saying no was easier. You could live cheaply without explaining yourself. You could take risks because the consequences were smaller. In your 30s, everything feels heavier. You might be supporting someone else now. A partner, a child, a parent, even if you're not. So the stakes feel higher. At the same time, expectations quietly increase. You're supposed to be established, supposed to be thinking long-term, supposed to be building something solid. But no one tells you what that actually looks like day to day. So you're left guessing. You save a little when you can. You try not to overspend. You avoid obvious mistakes. Yet the progress feels invisible. Months go by and nothing dramatic changes. No big breakthrough. No moment where things suddenly feel secure. That's when doubt creeps in. You start wondering if you waited too long, if you should have done more earlier, if small efforts even matter anymore. And then there's comparison. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind that sneaks up on you while scrolling or listening to conversations you didn't ask to overhear. Someone mentions buying property like it just happened naturally. Someone else talks about planning for the future with confidence you don't feel. People your age seem to have clarity you can't find. You don't know their full story, but your brain fills in the gaps anyway. It tells you they figured it out and you didn't. So you start pressuring yourself. You tell yourself you need to catch up. You need to optimize. You need to move faster. That pressure doesn't usually lead to better decisions. It leads to rushed ones. You consider drastic changes without fully understanding them. You feel tempted by ideas that promise speed instead of stability. Not because you're irresponsible, but because you're overwhelmed. Your 30s create a strange contradiction. You're more capable than you've ever been, but you also have less mental space than you've ever had. Your attention is pulled into many directions at once. Career demands, personal relationships, health, time slipping faster than you expected. Money becomes just one more thing you're trying to manage well, but it often ends up absorbing stress from every other part of your life. When work is stressful, money feels fragile. When relationships are uncertain, money feels scary. When the future feels unclear, money feels urgent. So even small financial decisions start to carry emotional weight. You overthink them. You second-guess yourself. You replay past choices in your head. And because there's no clear feedback loop, it's hard to know if you're actually doing okay. Instead, silence fills the gap, and silence lets fear speak. Fear tells you that if you haven't reached some invisible milestone by now, you're falling behind permanently. Fear tells you that wealth is built by people who are more disciplined, more focused, more confident than you. Fear tells you that the window is closing, but that fear ignores something crucial. It ignores how uniquely chaotic this decade is. Your 30s aren't just about money. They're about transition. You're transitioning from potential to reality, from flexibility to responsibility, from short-term survival to long-term stability. That transition costs energy, it costs attention, and it costs money in ways you didn't have to deal with before. So when you feel like you're treading water, it's not because you're standing still. It's because you're carrying more weight while trying to move forward. Most people don't talk about this part. They talk about outcomes, not the messy middle. They talk about where they ended up, not how confusing it felt while they were getting there. So you end up assuming you're alone in this experience, but you're not. Feeling stuck in your 30s is incredibly common. Feeling unsure doesn't mean you've failed. Feeling slow doesn't mean you're off track. It means you're in the middle of something that doesn't show results right away, and before anything can change. Not from a technical perspective, from a human one. To understand why building wealth in your 30s feels so confusing, you have to understand what's happening in your mind, not just your bank account. Most people think money problems come from bad math. Your brain is juggling more roles than ever before. You're not just earning money anymore. You're planning, anticipating, protecting, trying to avoid future regret. That constant background thinking drains you. Here's a simple way to think about it. In your 20s, money decisions were mostly short-term. Can I afford this? Will I get paid again soon? In your 30s, every decision suddenly feels permanent. Will this affect my future? Am I locking myself into something? What if I choose wrong? That shift alone creates pressure. Your brain starts treating money like a test you can fail, instead of a tool you can adjust. Another psychological trap shows up quietly around this age. Expectation gap ***. You grew up hearing a story about adulthood. Work hard. Be responsible. Things stabilize over time. Your brain assumes something is wrong, but what actually happens is the opposite. Life complexity increases faster than financial clarity. More moving parts, more obligations, more decisions with delayed consequences. Your brain doesn't like delayed feedback. When you work out, you feel tired immediately. When you study, you feel effort immediately. But with money, effort often feels invisible for years. You save, you plan, you sacrifice, and nothing feels different. That disconnect makes your brain doubt the process. So it looks for shortcuts. It starts asking, is there a faster way? Am I missing something obvious? Why does this feel harder than it should? And nothing feels different. That's when comparison becomes dangerous. Your brain is wired to measure progress relative to others, especially under uncertainty. When you don't know if you're doing well, you look sideways. And in your 30s, what you see sideways is misleading. You see outcomes without context. You see homes without knowing the debt. You see confidence without seeing anxiety. You see stability without seeing how long it took. Your brain fills in the missing details with assumptions. They must be ahead. They figured it out earlier. I'm late. Those thoughts create urgency. Urgency narrows thinking. Instead of asking, what's sustainable for me, you start asking, how do I catch up? That question alone changes behavior. You become more reactive, more sensitive to fear, more likely to abandon simple, boring progress because it doesn't feel fast enough. There's another psychological shift that happens in your 30s that almost no one talks about. Your identity becomes tied to your decisions. In your 20s, mistakes felt temporary. In your 30s, mistakes feel defining. You're not just choosing how to spend money. You're choosing who you are. Responsible or reckless. Successful or behind. Smart or foolish. That emotional weight makes decisions heavier than they need to be. So instead of moving steadily, you freeze. You wait for certainty. You wait until you feel confident enough to act. But confidence rarely comes before action. It comes after repetition. Another important piece. Buying something visible feels like progress. Saving something invisible feels like nothing. Your brain rewards visible change. That's why it's easier to feel successful after buying something than after quietly building stability. But wealth doesn't grow through visible moments. It grows through repetition that feels boring at the time. Your brain wasn't designed to celebrate boring, so it gets impatient. And impatience creates the illusion that you're behind. Here's the part most people misunderstand. They think wealthy people felt calm and confident while building wealth. In reality, most of them felt uncertain for a long time. They questioned themselves. They worried they were moving too slowly. They felt like nothing was happening. But they understood something crucial, even if they couldn't articulate it yet. You're building systems, habits, margins of safety. Those don't show up as lifestyle changes right away. They show up as fewer emergencies later, less panic during setbacks, more options over time. But your brain wants immediate reassurance. When it doesn't get it, it creates stress stories. I should be further. I wasted time. I'm running out of chances. Those stories feel real, but they're reactions to uncertainty, not reflections of reality. There's also grief involved, even if you don't realize it. Your 30s are when you quietly grieve the idea that everything would feel settled by now. That loss of expectation hurts. But wealth doesn't respond well to pressure. It responds to consistency, and consistency requires emotional calm. This is why understanding the psychology matters more than knowing tactics right now. If you don't understand why your brain is fighting you, you'll keep thinking the problem is effort. You'll keep trying to do more instead of doing better. The truth is, nothing is broken. You're experiencing the normal mental friction of a decade where responsibility grows faster than reassurance. Once you see that clearly, something shifts. You stop interpreting discomfort as failure. You stop confusing slow progress with no progress. You stop letting fear rush decisions that need time. And that understanding opens the door to the next realization. Because their is a cost to misunderstanding this phase. Not a loud cost, a quiet one. and it builds slowly, year by year, whether you notice it or not. When people think about the cost of poor money decisions, they usually imagine something dramatic: debt piling up, a major mistake, a visible crash. But the most dangerous cost in your 30s is much quieter than that. It's not what you lose all at once. It's what never gets the chance to grow. Not dramatic delay, subtle delay. A year here, 2 years there. Long enough that nothing feels urgent, but long enough that time starts doing less work for you. Here's how it usually shows up. Because you feel unsure, you keep money on hold, not spending it recklessly, not investing it confidently either. It just sits there, waiting for clarity that never fully arrives. You tell yourself you'll act once things feel more stable, once income increases, once life calms down. But life rarely calms down on its own. So months turn into years of hesitation. From the outside, it looks responsible. From the inside, it feels safe. But time doesn't pause just because you're unsure. And time is the quiet partner in every financial decision you make. Another invisible cost is emotional fatigue. You carry low-level stress constantly. You think about money more than you want to. You avoid looking too closely because it brings up guilt or confusion. That mental weight makes consistency harder. You don't quit outright. You just stop paying attention. And when attention fades, systems fall apart slowly. Small habits break first. Saving becomes irregular. Planning becomes vague. Decisions become reactive instead of intentional. Not because you stopped caring, because caring without clarity is exhausting. There's also a cost to constantly feeling behind. When you believe you're late, your behavior changes. You rush. You compare. You chase outcomes instead of building foundations. That mindset leads people to skip the boring steps. They underestimate stability and overestimate speed. They want something to happen so they jump between strategies. They change direction often. They undo progress without realizing it. The damage isn't immediate. It shows up later as inconsistency. Another invisible cost is how uncertainty affects your future self. Every year you delay building simple structure. You push more responsibility onto an older version of yourself. You tell yourself future you will handle it. Future you will be more disciplined. Future you will have more money. But future you also has less time, and more obligations, and more reasons to avoid complexity. This isn't about regret. Time works in both directions. It rewards steady action, and it magnifies hesitation. What makes this especially tricky is that the cost doesn't feel painful while it's happening. There's no immediate penalty for waiting. No alarm goes off. No warning message appears. So your brain interprets delay as harmless. But the cost shows up later as pressure. Pressure to save more aggressively. Pressure to take risks you don't fully understand. Pressure to compress years of steady behavior into a shorter window. That pressure creates stress. And stress makes money decisions worse, not better. When you don't build margin early, your choices narrow later. You become more dependent on income, more sensitive to disruptions, less flexible when opportunities or problems appear. This doesn't mean everything collapses. It means everything feels tighter than it needs to. You feel like you're always reacting instead of choosing. That feeling slowly shapes your relationship with money. Money becomes something you worry about instead of something that supports you. People with similar incomes can experience completely different levels of peace, depending on whether they built structure early or postponed it. Not perfection, structure. The invisible cost also shows up in confidence. When you don't trust your system, you don't trust your decisions. So you second-guess yourself constantly. You wonder if you're doing enough. You wonder if you're doing it right. You wonder if you should change everything. That uncertainty creates mental noise. The cruel irony is that most people don't need dramatic changes. They need clarity and patience. But because the cost of confusion is invisible, they assume the solution must be complex. So they overlook the simplest turning point of all. Understanding that building wealth in your 30s is less about acceleration and more about alignment. Once that alignment clicks, the pressure eases. Because you stop trying to force progress. You start letting time participate again. And that brings us to the moment most people miss. The quiet turning point that changes how this decade feels. Not a windfall, not a breakthrough, not a sudden sense of mastery, a realization, one that shifts the entire emotional weight of money in your 30s. The turning point doesn't feel dramatic. There's no big announcement, no sudden confidence, no moment where everything finally makes sense. It usually happens quietly, almost disappointingly so. It's the moment you stop asking, "Why am I not further ahead?" and start asking, "What actually matters?" right now. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Up until this point, most people approach money in their 30s with tension. They're trying to prove something, to fix the past, to catch up to an invisible timeline. That pressure makes every decision feel loaded. But the turning point comes when you realize something simple and deeply relieving. Your 30s are not about winning money. They're about stabilizing your relationship with it. That realization removes urgency, and urgency is what causes most mistakes. When you let go of the idea that you're behind, your behavior changes almost immediately. You stop chasing dramatic progress. You stop expecting clarity before action. You stop treating every decision like it has to be perfect. Instead, you start valuing repeatable choices. Not impressive ones, not optimized ones, repeatable ones. This is where wealth actually starts forming. Not because you suddenly make more money, but because you stop leaking energy into doubt. It's to reduce future stress. That's a very different goal, and it leads to very different decisions. You start asking calmer questions. What would make my life slightly easier next year? What decision gives me more room to breathe? What system would still work even when I'm tired? Those questions are grounded. They don't rely on motivation. They don't rely on discipline. They rely on reality. This is also when guilt starts to loosen its grip. You stop replaying what you should have done earlier. You stop punishing yourself for not knowing things sooner. You realize that regret doesn't build anything. Consistency does. Another important shift happens here. Instead of asking, "Do I feel rich yet?" you ask, "Is my situation more stable than it was before?" Capacity to handle surprises. Capacity to absorb setbacks. Capacity to wait. That capacity is invisible to others, but it's everything. This is also where people finally understand a hard truth. Wealth doesn't remove uncertainty. It just reduces how threatening uncertainty feels. You don't need to eliminate risk. You need to be able to survive it calmly. Once that clicks, your behavior becomes steadier. You stop starting over every few months. You stop abandoning plans when life gets messy. You stop thinking a bad month erased years of effort. This is when patience stops feeling passive and starts feeling powerful. Because patience isn't waiting. It's choosing not to sabotage progress just because it's slow. You also begin to see your 30s differently. Not as a countdown, not as a deadline, but as a construction phase. Messy, unattractive, necessary. No one judges a building by its foundation while it's being poured. But that foundation determines everything that comes after. Once you internalize this, the anxiety softens. You still care about money. You're still intentional, but you're no longer panicked. And that emotional state matters more than any tactic. Because calm people make better decisions over long periods of time. They don't chase every idea. They don't abandon simplicity. They don't confuse motion with progress. They keep showing up. That's the real turning point. Not when your numbers change. When your relationship with money changes. When money stops being a constant judgment of your worth and becomes a quiet system supporting your life. From here on, progress doesn't feel urgent. It feels inevitable. And that's the moment when building wealth in your 30s finally starts working the way it was always meant to.